Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar session, or Columbinar, as we used to call it. Today's topic is going to be about how to solve the hidden data challenge within B2B and how to drive efficient customer experience innovation. And Oscar, what do we actually mean with that there is a hidden challenge within this space?
Yeah, exactly. The hidden challenge. So there is what we mean is that what we are identifying is that there is a complexity driving time in all CX projects that resides in problem around getting access to data. And it's something that we see that partners assume that the customers are in control of, and customers assume that the partners will solve it. So that's sort of my view. Is there anything to add? What's your view on it?
Yeah, exactly. That's my words exactly, and I think that's the tricky part on the change management bit, because technically you can always solve things. It takes more time. It obviously increases the budget. It changes the time plan of projects. You sometimes kind of outshoot scopes and so on. But it's a big change management piece to this that I believe is also a hidden challenge within this.
But who are we, and why are we
Yeah,
entitled to speak about this?
exactly. Well, I can introduce myself. My name is Robin Slots. I work as a senior advisor at Columbus, and Columbus is a company that's been doing digital project and helping customers within digital advisory and implementation projects for the past 15 years. We've done 300 plus implementation projects. So I hope we can be answering some of these tough challenges. And Oscar, I'm delighted to have you on the call. Who do you represent?
Thank you. And yeah, so I represent Occtoo, which is a software company, a relatively new player in the field. Personally, I also come from a consultancy background with close to 15 years in the CX space, working with PIM projects, e-commerce projects, CX projects of various kind. I think close to 100 ones been engaged in. Currently with Occtoo, which is an experience data platform. And if we can get the slide, I was going to take just a few minutes to introduce very briefly what Occtoo is. It's an experience data platform, and I'm going to try to very briefly explain this with an analogy. If you imagine like running a CX or digital project is like baking a cake. The first thing you need to do is that all the ingredients that you need for this cake, you need to pull that out of and search for it in different cabinets, in different drawers, in different cabins, different boxes, refrigerator, whatever. You need to get a hold of all these ingredients. Consider that being the data that you need for your front-end experience. And then when you start baking out this, you need to combine these different types of ingredients separately. So you need to combine and unify all your dry ingredients in a temporary storage. Just take all your wet ingredients and you start mixing it together. And then you combine both wet and dry ingredients. You mix everything together and you bake off the cake. And this takes a lot of time. So in the end, as you have spent so much time on this, your guests are coming and you feel that, okay, there's no time for decoration. I just throw something out. But we all know that you eat with the eye. And there is a similarity to this that we see, that normally we tend to spend so much time in projects on this data challenge that there is less time for UX. And if you compare this, what is an experience data platform? It's basically a tool that gives you direct access to all these kind of ingredients in real time. So you basically have a stream of your data that you can access instantly. You mix and match it for the different data sets, and you expose it for different purposes. So the value of this is that you're either possibility to bake more cakes or time to do nicer cakes, depending on what it is. But if you put it in IT language, we make it possible for digital teams to combine and publish data from multiple sources to reduce time on integrations and to basically be able to launch digital experience faster. But we will come back to this later on. First, I'm going to ask you, Robin, to dig a little bit deeper into the challenge and around B2B and where the data challenge has impact.
Yeah, thanks. So I will start by talking about the evolution of commerce, just to set the scene a little bit. So we know we've come from single channel, multi-channel, omni-channel, and now we are in this phase called unified commerce or connected commerce. And this seamless customer experience is what customers today expects. It is a very fast-paced digital landscape, and customers are more demanding than ever before. And they expect these seamless, personalized experience to cater to their unique needs and preferences. So in order to stay competitive, businesses must provide this enhancing customer experience. And to put this into a B2B context, for example, when a customer contacts your after-sales team, they expect you to know everything about them, what they have typically used to buy, what pricing tier they belongs to, what other services they have, and what ongoing engagement that could apply in certain situations. So as more touch points are added and devices are capturing data, this puts a huge strain on keeping the customer experience consistent across these channels. What's your view on the data challenge?
Yeah, I see. This is a very interesting phenomenon that's also happened, because not only are we sort of now seeing that the customers also expect the data to be there, but it's also a strong development on that. We see, for instance, our customers, they do more and more experimentation around this, where there are more places that they need to expose data. Or actually, at many times before Occtoo, they were afraid of trying out new things because it tended to be so big projects. So not only is, I think this is a hard combination for many companies out there, that there are so many touch points and the data needs to be correct, updated, rich everywhere, but still historically digital products has been quite extensive and quite exhausting to run. So I think this is a big challenge.
Yep. So moving on, the typical kind of experiences that B2B buyers are looking for, what are those? Well, if we put in simple terms, the overall goal is to simplify the everyday work experience for customers or for B2B buyers. And at the same time, we want to improve the efficiency for your sales staff. So taking the full product life cycle of a product or a fleet of products into account, some of the overall objectives that your customers or employees are aiming for could be increased self-service capabilities. It could be having all relevant information regarding fleet management, financials, product information, all in the same place. It could be to have smart order notifications or service calendars that gives you heads up when it's time to book your next repair, and the list can go on and on. But this is, in essence, what you need to help to create to have this stickiness effect that your customers don't want to be without, because this space is continuously being more saturated with competition and more demands from the multiple challenge emerging, because we see nowadays that B2B companies are expected to deliver an experience that is more convenient and more transparent, and actively support the customer throughout their journey, wherever channel they prefer in that specific moment. Because this task becomes now so much complex, as we see numbers coming in from McKinsey, that channels that the customers adopt has actually doubled in the past 5 years. So customers say that they are now interacting with suppliers in more than 10 or so channels. And when it comes to how effective these channels are, respondents now rank e-commerce as the single most efficient channel compared to in-person transactions. So we see now this tipping point where digital sales or e-commerce sales is surpassing in-person selling as their preferred sales channel. So we are in this truly omni-channel terminology, even in the times of B2B, and we see these new sales models emerging actually. So as these customer interactions are moving to digital channels, what we see is that to make it easy for customers to navigate in this new reality, sales reps from different companies now have the increased need to guide and help and advise the customers and direct them to different stages of the buying journey. where they can then handle the different experiences. Because in the past, it has been in-person selling and in-person contact within the landscape altogether, because then the seller has been completing these tasks on behalf of the client themselves. But what we can see now is that we have this rule of third that has emerged as a new sales model. So customers employ roughly an even mix between traditional sales, remote sales, and sales service at different stages of the sales process. So we have now around 70-80% of B2B decision makers are actually preferring remote or digital self-service capabilities. So I think this is exactly what makes this challenge on the one hand very, very complex for customers to for companies to adapt to, but the change in how customers are actually searching and browsing for experiences.
And I also think that the picture indicates there's also proof that this now, the whole digitalization of the customer experience, I mean, it's moving to other parts as well. It's not that it stops with the initial transaction or the order. It moves throughout sort of the whole life cycle, that you expect to be able to, when you need it, find accurate delivery information, to find all the information about your previous transactions, or when you're doing your reorders, or how your usage about your product, if you're having more of a complex product stack, that is like digital first approach. You go you go online and expect to find this information. You don't want to expect to call anyone or interact with anyone in field sales, field service, or whatever like that. So it's sort of tons of other different type of digital services that are emerging. That sort of happens after the initial sale, which is also important to remember.
And we will come back to this on how digital, remote, and in-person selling can kind of come together. But the reality now is that we can't solve the needs of this entire segment of customers through one channel, nor can the e-commerce channel help to fulfill all these requirements either. It has to be this kind of mix in between physical and digital. And as we want to increase the customer experience and cater for this hybrid selling model, and we want to create these more self-service capabilities, it requires that the data and the backend processes are ready to be exposed to the customer in a unified and seamless experience, as you were pointing out in the very beginning, Oscar. So what we find from Columbus in pretty much every project we enter is that there is a huge challenge around data. So most often we find time spent on finding where the data is stored, we clean it, we free it up to help to create these experiences. And why is that? I mean, I think we pointed out in the first sentence, because we see that data is scattered across multiple systems. They are locked into silos at various departments, and it's not unusual. We end up having to work with raw data that can be messy, or having missing values, or duplicates. It could be errors in it, and sometimes these data is also locked into complex structures, and therefore we need to liberate it before we can put it in the hands of our front-end team to actually create these experiences. And this takes time and help. It's why we sometimes go over budget. It can cause delays in project timelines, and it creates errors and limitations and so on. So I think this is exactly where we kind of want to create this unified experience and expose this data as different services. And when we say that the data is locked into silos, what do we mean? If I go first, we say that to build a unified customer experience and support the user needs, we need extensive content, and that content comes from various systems. And these systems are produced and managed by different parts of the organization typically. And since the requirements and expectations from customers are increasing, as we've been pointing out, they expect different types of information for different user scenarios, like the customer portal example, for instance. And it could be detailed product facts, it could be service schedules, it could be customer specific price list, and so on. And you need multiple systems to manage and deliver your experience. But there can also be then also many parts of the organization that's involved in creating and managing this data, and that brings the extra complexity. What's your view on
Yeah,
this?
so also tapping into what sort of so there's also there are multiple different systems that are there for a reason and needs to be there in an organization, where you have but you also have across the systems. If we take the product as one example, it still holds information that comes and being sourced out of many different systems. So the PIM system basically holds the marketing related information, but there are transactional related details around the product that tend to be kept in the ERP. There could be sort of manufacturing or traceability information around the product consists in the PLM. So in order to get like a full view of the product, you need to access data out of all of these systems. If we look at the customer domain as another example, typically, I mean, many very mature organizations, they have a CDP, for instance, and a CDP is very good at collecting all information around a single customer, better than a more traditional CRM. That's why you have the CDP. But what a CDP doesn't hold is that it doesn't hold then the rich details about the products, price lists, assortment information. It doesn't hold that kind of information that you tend to, in many occasions, you need to combine to bring that really relevant experience. So this is, you need somewhere where you can unify and combine different types of domain objects, like customers, like products, or transactions, or deliveries, or where you can take the rich data sets and combine them. That's where you can create a really good contextual experience.
Because in projects, what do we typically do? Like the old state, what we usually do is that in order to activate the data needed to build that kind of experience, say around an e-commerce system or so, you start to integrate these systems, and you start to push data to one touch point or to one interface, and this is where historically you kind of pull all the data from the different sources, you merge them, and you then end up trying to combine these all data sets into one place to help to create this unified experience. And so for us in this example, we push it to the e-commerce platform to help build this experience. Why is this a challenge for teams and for customers in the long run? Well, the e-commerce platform is not built to handle this activity. So pushing all the data, merging it, unify it to create this kind of experience as well, it's really a transactional system, right? And none of these common platform that we see on the screen in a typical solution landscape, is built for this either, because they are different systems operating in different silos, and they don't share the same database. So they are as in fact silo operating. So this is why it becomes so hard to add services to scale the experience.
And I think I can add to that. Being in e-commerce project for over 15 years back, you can also look at how like such platforms have evolved. Going back 10 years, you had everything in the platform. You had the CMS, you had the cart management, the order management, customer view, the product catalog, the PM, everything was in the search and everything. And then the headless trend came. So then you have a separate CMS, and then you have all the search capabilities. That's now so more advanced that you no longer have the search in the e-com. And you have moved out the product catalog basics, you moved it out to a PIM system, but you still keep sort of the mindset of that you take all this data just to be able to access it when you build a front end. We need somewhere to put it. So that sort of capability either resides in the e-com, or some people try to have that capability in a headless CMS, but that doesn't really, or it's not really adapted for that either, or they end up by having to build some sort of custom solution. for this that holds it, and which tends to be costly and expensive.
Yeah.
And another dimension for this also, that this is then driving this way of thinking, is that you push the data into a tool that's built for a specific purpose. So whenever you're going to build something other than that's just not capturing that specific transaction, when you have the new front-end technologies to build different kind of apps, then the data has a completely different purpose and probably needs to be modeled in a different way.
Yep, true that. So I've been mentioning the word customer portal a few times to try and explain what we mean. This is a conceptual drawing of what we find a modern customer portal, what it could look like, and this is a way of exposing data from various underlying systems. So we actually create an experience on top of your landscape of systems, see them as decoupled services. So this is a screen that is completely widget based, and we can extend functional areas that could be envisioned on the left hand side as the solution grows and more capabilities are enabled. So what we see on the screen is that by the use of notifications, we could, for example, help customers find and execute different tasks on order routing or services, or it can be around relevancy. So whenever your product is due into repair, we can have these kind of service suggestions popping out. It could be examples of related products or existing products that could be needed to be replaced and so on. So it's a nice way of presenting data from underlying systems in one consolidated view.
I think this is a very good example, because it shows the dimension of the different types of data and different types of business objects that sort of comes into play. And there are, imagine that you need somehow to resolve how you're going to unify all these different kinds of objects and all these different kinds of information. That, because under each type of this information category or service category, there tends to be driving a lot of complexity in the data, how it's structured with customer specific agreement, product complexity, etc. And that data resides in many systems. But what's your learnings from this, Robin, in terms of how easy has it been historically to implement these kind of things?
Well, I to be honest with you, we have implemented this a few times for customers, but remember 2 slides back, the kind of old state on how we used to do things. So depending on the customer landscape, if the customer landscape was kind of had many obsolete systems and we were plugging in a brand new e-commerce solution, we tend to pick the e-commerce solution as the single source of truth. So we pushed all the data to build that kind of experience. And when the customer wanted to unify this kind of next level of experience to have this kind of customer portal, again, we need to find these new data objects, push them on, do this all this kind of repetitive tasks again. And if it's for another customer, we then had a modern CMS, a headless CMS as the single source of truth. So in that case, we built the entire customer portal experience around the CMS. But as I was saying, it's not purposely built for handling this kind of experience. So we would like to have, a completely decoupled front end that can lay and reside on, exposed data services. That's more available to us. So very cumbersome to realize, actually.
So extensive and it might look good from the beginning, that it's like, okay, we just do it, it's in commerce platform because we just need a basic product information, basic customer information. Then when you're going to extend this to the next step, then that's when sort of the real true complexity starts to rising. Oh shit, now we're in trouble. But maybe this is a good cue into the next step of talking about, okay, but how do we actually resolve this, and how can you actually look at this?
Yes, please.
So I'm going to start with this picture really, and that's in terms of the solution strategy. This is how many actors out there, how you draw like the typical complexity of a CX solution stack of today. You have in the bottom, you have multiple sources of information, multiple backend systems that holds this kind of information that needs to come into play and need to be exposed on the front end. And on top of that, you have so many business components and business capabilities that you need in order to drive the experience with cockpits and tools and things that you need to deliver a good experience, which used to be 1-2 platforms, but now can be 7, 8, 9, 10 systems that all need data. Combine that with that, if you don't only look at the customer portal, that's one type of digital screen, digital interaction. But if you look at other types of things that you might also provide as a B2B or manufacturing company, you might have direct to consumer experiences. You might have sales supports app, you have field service solutions, you might have stores where you have point of sale solutions or even in-store experiences. So if you start combining out of these things, you have multiple backend systems that holds the data, you have multiple sort systems in the middle that needs different types of data, and you have multiple front ends that also need. So it tends to be, there could be a lot of lines if you would apply like a typical integration platform strategy point to point on this kind of things. But underneath this sort of solution stack, there are I'm grouping the data challenge in 3 different areas to make it a bit tangible. So if you move to the next slide, the first question that arises that is, okay, how do you easily unlock the data out of your backend solutions? That's like the first step, thinking about the unlocking perspective. And again, coming back to what happens in many digital projects is that, yeah, we have an API, fine. The digital agency or the system integrator says that's good, but then you realize, okay, but it only has this system, or the API was only for those parts, not for that parts, or that system doesn't have an API, etc. So that's the first type of strategy, a part of a solution strategy that you need to address in terms of data. The second part is how to combine the data. Where are you going to do that? And how are you going to combine that data in different ways to make it relevant for that specific experience? In many occasions, you could see that you try to just combine everything in a big product model, and that is very hard to consume for a front end. So what you also want to be able to do is, how can you make this flexible in a way that you could model a product in one way for the customer portal, you can model a product in a different way for a supplier solution, or you could model a product in a third way for a internal sales solution. So that's like the second one, how to combine the data. And the third one is, okay, but how do you make the data available then in real time? Because that's what the front ends need. They need the data in real time to be fast and efficient. And one challenge in that sense is that if you're a front-end developer building an e-com site today, you might have 6, 7, 8 different APIs that you need to call. And to each API, you need to call that 2 or 3 times, which tends to both drive loading times, but also making that you're sort of really just pushing the whole data challenge out to the front-end team. And how on earth is a front-end developer knows exactly what out of those 350 characteristics or specification of a product that's going to be displayed? And that also something that drives complexity. So ask yourself these 2 things: how to unlock data, how to combine data, and how to expose the data. I'm going to show you, I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into these different types. So if we start with the first one, you're unlocking the data, because you might think now, well, we have APIs on all our systems, we just expose it to the front end directly, so then we don't bother. And that's exactly how it is, because normally this is how you imagine that your system landscape looks like. That you imagine that, well, we're just going to build an app, we're going to build the front end. We have different systems, we have APIs on our ERP, but what tends to be, and that's scalable, that can cope with anything. But that's normally how you imagine the solution or how you think it should be, because in reality, it looks a bit different. So if you take the next slide, you can see that this is normally tends how the real world architecture look like. That you might forget, oh yeah, we have some of this information in the PLM system, and that doesn't even have an API on top of it. And the ERP systems are also tends to, those APIs, they process a lot of business logic in them. So they tend to be a bit slow. Especially if you're going to fuel a fast and good front-end experience with real-time data. You can also have the scenario where you actually have an API that only covers part of the functionality or part of the data sets that you have in the system. For instance, we know several PIM systems where you need to, in order to like generate the full product details page, you need to ask that API with 6 or 7 different questions in order to get that full, which also tends to drive complexity in this scenario. So what you need to do and think of that you have some sort of capability. You can take the next slide. Some sort of capability here that enables your data, that activates your data, that makes it easy to consume. Some sort of data layer, some sort of caching solution, or an experience data platform in this case, that sort of brings and adding so those extended capabilities to your backend systems to be able to activate the data, to unlock it, to make it more easy to consume. So that's one type of example. Do you have anything to add on this one?
Yeah, I think this is exactly where we sit in all our projects, as I was pointing out before. This is the conversation we have when entering projects. We expect the customer obviously to have existing solutions being up to par with reality. The customer believes so themselves, or that we can just handle it because the data is available. But reality is really the middle example that that resonates with me so well, even too well. So yeah, I can just go on saying that this is a reality.
So this is at least the first question to ask in terms of data, in terms of products. If we move into the second part, which is about combining and modeling your data, because even if you take like the previous scenario, well, you have everything available. In order to combine it, as we say, a product, when you're going to display a product somewhere, you might have 2, 3, or 4 different sources on that kind of information. Or if you have product information coming from your PIM, but you have customer-specific assortment information in your ERP, and you also have segmentation data from your CDP around, you need to be able to combine those 3 data points to create that relevance for that specific experience. And the way to think it more modern is to streamline the efforts on when you're building front ends, is to expose exactly the right and relevant data that you need for that specific purpose. Like, as I said before, being able to model a product in one way for one purpose, to model it in another way for another purpose, where you might need less information, more information, you might have it structured in a different way. In one view, you might want to include bill of material. In another view, you might not want to include a bill of material. So it's also a way to see, how can you bring in this type of capabilities to how can you easily combine the data? How can you relate data to each other that you might not be able to relate in a specific system because it comes out of different systems? How are you able to mix and match these kind of things? And this is a strong feature to be able to like build this kind of purpose-specific data sets in order to save time for your front-end implementation, but also to speed up access to data to make them more performant. And this could be any type of object, like products, configurations, or if you don't have a CDP, it could be customer reviews, it could be quotes, bill of materials, etc., depending on what kind of business object that it is that you want to expose and relate to other business objects. So this is like the second part. Okay, where do you combine and model to making sure that you can offer 360 views of any type of business object, not only the customer, not only the product, but any type of thing. And to show you an example of what we mean with this, moving to the next one, is that we talk about, for instance, about the hyper-intelligent product. If you look at a certain product, there is a lot of information around the product that comes from different sources. It tends to be, well, you have all the product information in the PIM system. Well, it normally tends to be a PIM system and a PLM system that comes into play. You might have a DAM system as well that holds additional resources, or some sort of content repository where you keep additional information. So you have one category of information that tends to be like all the specifications of a product. But around that, you also have specific transactional related data around the product that could be where it's produced, what kind of margins you have on certain products, what assortments it includes, if it's customer specific assortments, if it's built to produce products, you have bill of materials, what's going in, you have the spare parts relations that might be very complex as well. So there's this kind of other type of information as well. And then you have the third one, which is more the behavioral data types, which what type of customer profiles have this product, who views it the most, how is it used, especially around the usage, if it's really much is this IoT connected devices, how is it used, etc., that comes out of different warehouses. If you could combine and unify all this information, suddenly you could create much more intelligent experiences, or slice and dice the data in a much more intelligent way than you would be able to do if you would fetch this information from each and every single system one by one. So that's an example of unification.
Yeah, I think this is exactly tying back to the example around what a customer portal or a kind of a B2B self-service portal would offer. It actually brings all these three perspectives into play, because depending on your user role, we can actually help to segment and present the relevant data for your needs at that specific time. So we can actually bring in the behavioral, the context, the transactional part, the specifications part, and tie that to that business user. So if you're a buyer, if you're working within finance, if you're working within procurement, you can actually enter the same portal, but having a personalized experience for you, because the data can be combined in so many different ways.
We actually have a customer that experimenting with this, that they are getting like all the rich product information from the PIM, and from their CDP they're getting like the segmentation, the details of customer segments. What do they normally buy as well, or what do they buy in relation, and the segment characteristics, where do they live, demographics of it, etc. And in the intersection of those two information sets, it generates dynamic content for that specific interaction. So persona A enters and looks at product X, they get a different experience from where persona B enters the portal and views the product X. So that's actually a very interesting and use case that's actually happening in reality, especially now with all the ChatGPT technologies, etc. That's happening there. So that's really interesting.
Yep.
Then the third one, as I mentioned, digging into that, is exposing data that's relevant for each experience and context. And that is, again, depending on making sure that data is accessible in real time and hyper fast. Because if there's one thing that sort of brings down an experience, is loading times. It's when a user interface doesn't feel like it's fast. So you need to be able to have this data available in real time, unified and high performant. But also, again, coming back to the capability to taking these different business objects, relate them to each other, and expose exactly what is relevant for each and every interaction. Like, instead of having just one big customer API where you fetch all and everything, what if you could have 4 different APIs depending on what type of screen that you're looking at? Or if you take the product as an example, instead of that, your team needs to go to one big product API to find all this information about products. What if they could have one API that would feed them results for the listing pages, one for the PDP, or one for the order details page where you need the other types of information. So it's about also thinking in a different mindset. Okay, how can I actually more dynamically model my information to make it more relevant for that specific micro moment, where you combine like the customer, who they are, the product about that, and the context that interaction is happening in. What kind of data do you need for that kind of things? And also then the last thing is that with everything that's happening around low programming, no programming development, also make sure that your digital team can be in control of this kind of rules, this kind of data, so that it should not be a developer task anymore, because that's also one thing that's sort of the trend that's really happening out there. If I just didn't show an example, how could sort of a typical, now maybe coming more into the promotional part of Occtoo, but if you would consider Occtoo being Occtoo is this experience data platform, and if you would consider like a solution stack that's a bit more untraditional, is that you need to address, even if you put Occtoo or not in the center of this, you need to address this data question. How are you going to act on this data? Because you have like the commerce and those kind of capabilities, that's more around a transactional part, but capturing sales and getting that data back to your backend systems. You have the editorial part, which also you needed, is that with all the CMS and the search capabilities and everything, that's sort of more enriched data, editorial data, that also needs to be there. But this this question around who's going to manage the data, that's a question that's rarely asked because you just assume that it goes in any of these systems that's not really built for the purpose. But I'm not gonna, I think we're getting close to the end. So I think it's time for a summary, right? What do you think?
I think it's time for a summary. I think we are really in interesting times. I mean, as you said, this is a game changer indeed on how we can actually enable data to be accessed much faster. We can create and mix and match these data sets and model data in a way that we haven't seen before. So the traditional way of doing things, I think it's time for a change.
So if I'm going to send a few thoughts with you before leaving this webinar, so if we move to the next slide, so if we're going to summarize what the elephant in the room, what we're really talking about, and that is that digital products take too long to execute. That is a fact. And the challenges that we see, this is driven by data silos and data structures that tends to increase integration complexity. And no one really wants to talk about it until you're in the middle of the burning project. Mm-hmm. The second challenge is that data cannot be activated fast enough, that it takes so much time to find out where the data is, where it's accessible, is it fully coverage, what's it used for, and different types of names that doesn't make sense, etc., drives time. And the third one is that this kind of, in the B2B scenario, you have customer structures, customer specific agreements, you have product structures that cannot be exposed properly, that you're having a hard time, for instance, with customer specific pricing, price lists, and those kind of things. Also, those kind of things that drives complexity. And the impact on this is that you tend to throw away budget because you waste budget so much time on this data messing around. It's not uncommon that 80% of a budget is spent only on these kind of backend things and data, manipulating, moving things around. And the impact for you is that it's actually slowing down your whole customer experience utilization. That you're likely only able to do one project a year or even one project every other year. What if you could do much more than that? And also, particularly in these times when you want to be able to try out and find new type of revenue streams, moving from product sales to service-oriented revenue streams. This again, of course, leads to that you're stuck in this bigger kind of CX project that you need to be able to innovate faster. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to summarize what sort of the resolution to this would be, moving to the next slide, again, saying the same thing, but take this with you. These are the main takeaways. Think about how you're going to unlock the data. How can you make it easy to unlock more data without adding new integrations every time? Second is, where should your team combine data from many systems without developer efforts? How should they do this? Where do you think that should happen? And three, how can you faster expose relevant data that's tailored for specific purpose screen or system that you can then, how you make it that reusable? If you would go into the next project and asking these kind of questions and finding a good solution for it, the impact will be huge. And if just to share with you some inspiration on this, if you then think yourself, if you we see impacts. If you address this in the correct way, you could do projects 4 times faster. That's a fact that we hear from our customers. And just imagine what kind of projects you have in pipeline. What is it that you would like to be able to do? And if you look at the next slide, you can see that there are some typical types of examples that you can build and drive much faster. It's not only about the customer portal or the e-commerce where everything tends to start. It's also about utilizing the experience for your field sales teams, the configure price quote solutions, sales solutions. How can you build tailored experience for them? Your partners or resellers, what kind of experience to them? How do they access information about your products? How do they get access to the assortments you sell through them or that you give through them? Customer service solutions. How is your customer services? How are they engaging in like 7, 8, 9 different systems to be able to answer questions? That's not efficient. What if you could do something nice and cool and neat on top of those systems? But also field service and support, and particularly what's happening more and more product-centric apps, especially if you have IoT connected products, etc. How are you sort of leveraging all that information and bringing that out to your users, to your customers? That's like sharing with you some inspirational thoughts. Robin, do you have some final words to share on the few minutes we have left?
Yes, I think thank you very much. I'm it's really inspirational things there too. I mean, building these experiences can be multiple depending on. I mean, it's so much unhidden potential within the data. So I think a modern data platform really can help uncover these valuable insights, even if it's, as you say, typically in this unstructured, very hard to access formats, because this data helps to not only just drive the data decision making and innovation, but it also helps turn ideas into reality. And by adding a solution like Occtoo into the tech stack, it actually enables these more seamless collaboration amongst teams, because as we were pointing out before, typically teams are having data siloed in different departments, and enabling this kind of unification layer also fosters kind of a different and more productive work environment and cross collaborative space as well. So I think solving the hidden data challenge with a modern platform actually reduces the time spent and efforts to do this kind of data wrangling, and it leads to cost saving, as you were pointing out, and it maximizes that data investments by making data more available. So I think it's easy also for decision makers to actually see that you can go to market with these ideas much faster. So I say what you say, Oscar. I think by addressing this data challenge, not hiding away from it, but addressing it and embracing it, and through the use of a modern data platform, you can actually then start to access the full potential of your data, drive innovation, and help to stay competitive in this data-driven world. So I think that's at least from my side what I'm really keen to continue the conversations with customers and the like. So that's all we have time for in this session. I will turn to see if we have anything coming in from the chat. So we have one question coming in. Let's see if we phrase it this way. So how can we help to enhance the partner experience? I think the way I were to interpret that question is kind of coming back to your close to final slide with the different kind of experiences that you can actually create. So the sales quoting tool, for instance, I think that use case is really great. So from a user perspective, the sales rep can actually use a sales configuration to help configure the tool, the product needed to generate a quote. But you could drop that quote, instead of sending it off to an email, you can drop that quote into a common system, a customer portal or a common system, and then the customer can log in, review that quote, and you can then jump on a remote call to actually talk about it. And in that instance, you have actually reduced typically the sales cycle, because it's a lot less back and forth than emails and Excel sheets going back and forth to kind of help mitigate that experience. So it's a sales quote for the sales team, but the user, the customer, could actually use the same kind of configuration to make their own example in here. So you could model the experience and create different kind of apps powered by the same data. So I think that's
another type of partner experience that we have helped other customers realize as well is especially in terms of content sharing. That tends to be sort of a little bit of challenging area, that especially if you have complex products, but that you have good products that you have resellers that are selling. For instance, how do they get access to all your images, all your assets, all your specifications? How do you make sure that experience takes in consideration what that partner can only buy or not might buy due to like local market regulations or assortment agreements, etc. Especially, it's also, if you look at that, that tends to be information coming out of a PLM, out of a PIM, and also but related to the customer or the partner specifically. But that's like one use case in terms of content sharing. Another example that we have is that we have customers that they need to be able to provide in an electronic format a really good, enhanced and good, rich experience of all the data points around the products that a reseller is selling. So they need access to a tailored specific API that suits their systems on their side, so they can consume and they can ping, they can pick up all changes to systems automatically, without having to build a complex integration, or they can even query that directly. And thirdly is that you might build your own complete digital experience that partners can embed, sort of a shop in shop or site in site, that you can actually stay in control of the experience, the digital experience that you want any user to have of your brand or your products. You can embed that into other sites. That's also a typical way of how you can use that. So it's all about what you want to do with your user interface. What Occtoo does is that we help you solve the data challenge to make the data more easy to consume.
And finally, we got this question. We take this quickly if we can before we close. Is the Occtoo solution, is that a CDP? Because you mentioned CDP a few times. Is Occtoo a CDP?
No, we're not a CDP. CDP is an excellent source for us because that has already unified a lot of the customer information. But the CDP holds rich information about the customer. It doesn't hold rich information about other types of business objects that you face in an organization. So a CDP is a very good friend of ours because that makes our job easier in terms of customer data.
Thank you very much. I think that's all we have time for. Please reach out to us if you want to continue the conversation. We have only so much time with us today. Thank you so much for listening in, and have a good rest of the day, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.